This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. Galactic Space Geek Jeff is absolutely out of his mind for today's guest and our episode, so we need to get right to it because we are talking to somebody who has had an amazing career and has an incredible point of view right now.
Yes, you are so correct. What problem are we solving today?
How do you build a space station?
Sequence start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How do you build a space station? We have a very special guest to explain all this to us, Jeff. Who is our guest today?
Our guest today is the one and only, the fantastic Bob Cabana. He is currently Associate Administrator of NASA.
Welcome to the show, Bob.
Hey, Jen, it's a real pleasure. And Jeff, I feel like it's WWW wrestling or something, the way you called me out there.
We should have given you a walk-in song.
Yeah, exactly. We welcome our guests very well to the show. We are excited to have you on our show today.
Wow.
Bob, definitely honored. And there's so many places we could start, and we want to get to all of the amazing things that you've done. But I want to know, when you were a kid, did you always want to be an astronaut?
Oh, man, Jennifer, I never dreamed I could be an astronaut when I was a young boy. All I wanted to do was fly jets, and I wanted to be a naval aviator and take off and land on aircraft carriers.
Yes.
But I held astronauts in high esteem. You got to remember, I'm old. When I was young, I was in elementary school and middle school watching black and white TV of the Mercury and Gemini astronauts. And then I was in high school and college. Well, I was in college for the Apollo program. But no, that was something that I didn't think I could do. I just thought, wow, those guys are just amazing. How can you do that?
Right.
And so my message to kids is, so what was my goal? It was to fly jets. And I got into the Naval Academy. I got to become a naval aviator. I chose
Go Navy, by the way.
Beat Army. And I took a commission in the Marine Corps. Marine pilots are naval aviators. The Marine Corps is part of the Navy.
Yes.
And so I was a Marine. But it's a step that led to being an astronaut eventually.
Wow.
You know, you got to set intermediate goals. It's hard to say I'm going to be an astronaut. But my goal was to become a pilot. And then it was to become a test pilot and use all the math and engineering I had in college along with flying.
Wow.
Once I became a test pilot, I qualified to be an astronaut. So I applied. And it's one thing kind of leads to another. So it's setting those intermediate goals and then not giving up. I didn't get into flight training, test pilot school, or the astronaut program on the first try. So and we can talk more about that. But it's persistence and setting a goal and not giving up till you achieve it.
That's fantastic.
That's terrific. Was there something, before we move on into your career, was there something, you said you got accepted into the Naval Academy, which is amazing. Was there something from before that, maybe your junior high school or high school years, that sort of gave you a kick in the pants to make the Naval Academy a goal to apply for?
Well, there was an old TV show, Men of Annapolis.
Okay.
And my dad was enlisted World War II Navy on a destroyer. At the end of the And I had an uncle that had been in the Navy, enlisted Navy in World War II. And my dad's cousin was in the Navy, and he ended up retiring as a master chief. And so there was naval heritage in my family, but also I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And there was what is now Minneapolis St. Paul International was Wold Chamberlain Field.
Oh.
And there was a naval air station there. And I used to watch P-2 Neptunes and A-4 Skyhawks fly in and out of there. I'd sit at the end of the runway.
No kidding.
And I just, so it was that's what kind of led me to the Naval Academy. And it really worked out well.
Yeah, it did.
Then, I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting back to being an astronaut, it was while I was at the Naval Academy, the Physics Honor Society took a field trip to the Kennedy Space Center to see Apollo 13. Yeah, I know. And I got to see Apollo 13 launch. All right.
What?
And
oh my gosh.
I was in the vehicle assembly building, little midshipman Bobby Cabana, and there's standard rockets stacked up to go to the moon. And I got pictures of the Apollo 14 and 15 stacked up in the VAB.
Oh,
but I never got
goodness.
a picture of me. I never dreamed I'd be an astronaut, let alone end up the director of the Kennedy Space Center. But,
right.
I'm looking at Jim Lovell, Naval Academy graduate, naval aviator, naval test pilot, astronaut. Yes. And it was like, well, maybe I could do that if I applied myself. So again,
hey, wait a minute, I'm on that same path as well.
Yeah. And, there are different seeds along the way that get planted, and you just got to nurture them a little bit and grow.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I mean, I just got in the VAB for the NASA Social for Psyche a couple months ago. And I mean, even at this age, I was in complete and total awe of that building. I can't imagine having seen it as a midshipman. Oh my gosh. It's phenomenal being in there. Okay, so now let's talk about being an astronaut, because you did some really cool things as an astronaut. Is there a couple things that you did that you would like to share with us? Because we know the really big one where you helped build the ISS. But what about what you did before that?
First off, most of what astronauts do is not fly in space. They support other people flying in space.
That's true.
And so I had a lot of cool jobs. I mean, when you get selected to be an astronaut, you start off as an astronaut candidate.
Right.
And first off, that was really amazing because you're in a class of experts in their field. PhD in geology, physics, other test pilots, flight test engineers. And it's an amazing group to be part of. And you take all these short courses. There's training that you have to do. I learned geology from Dr. Bill Mulberger from the University of Texas that taught geology to the Apollo astronauts.
Wow.
I had a short course in oceanography that was taught by Paul Scully Powers. And all these, the geology course, we're out in New Mexico on a field trip, and we're 10,500 feet above sea level. And we're going into the rocks, and we have, there's fossils of sea creatures in the rocks, and learning about geology. I thought that was so cool. So you get to be with all these experts in their field, and it's just really fun learning and asking questions. Once you complete astronaut candidate training, you're eligible for an assignment to a flight. And once you're assigned to a flight, that's another year of training during the shuttle program. Today, it's about 2 years of training. First off, astronaut candidate training lasts for 2 years now. And even the training for a space station mission, it's about 2 years long for a specific increment on the space station. But that training is spent learning about what you're going to be doing on your flight, how to operate the system. It's just very intense. And toward the end, you got no free time. But by the time you go, you're really good. So I'll talk more about flying in space, but then the collateral duties. So different jobs that I had while I was an astronaut. I was the deputy chief of flight operations at Ellington Field.
Okay.
Essentially being the XO of a squadron that had all different kinds of airplanes in it, and you're responsible for the people and the maintenance and everything. I was a Capcom. I was the lead capsule communicator and mission control for a team of astronauts that support and work in mission control while the crew's on orbit. And you're training with the crews, you're on console during the mission for ascent and entry. And that was like the best job I had when I wasn't flying in space, because you're still up on all the procedures and you're supporting those guys on orbit. And that was really cool. One of my jobs, I was chief of the astronaut office. I was in charge of all the astronauts. I assigned them to their flight.
Fun. That sounds fun.
That was fun. Yeah, it was a lot of work. But it was very rewarding. So I worked in the shuttle avionics and integration lab, testing the software that went on board the shuttle for each mission. So a lot of different technical jobs that I had supporting other people flying in space. And then the missions I had, they were really cool. My first flight, I was the pilot of the Discovery, and we deployed Ulysses into polar orbit around the sun. That was a joint ESA NASA project that studied the sun from the polar regions. We launched it and sent it out to Jupiter, and all the planets orbit the sun in the ecliptic plane. It's a plane around the sun's equator. So this probe went out to Jupiter, and it flew over the North Pole of Jupiter, and then Jupiter's gravity flung it out of the ecliptic plane. So it went back over the South Pole of the sun, then came back around and went over the North Pole of the sun. So it was in a 5-year orbit around the sun. And it was it had 18 experiments on board to study the sun's magnetosphere and a bunch of other stuff. And it was supposed to work for one revolution around the sun, right? One pass.
Yeah.
It worked for 18 years. And
cow, that's fantastic.
That's how well we design things.
There you go. Yes.
But what was cool is the sun has a cycle to it, and it's called a solar minimum and a solar maximum.
Yes.
It heats up our atmosphere during a solar maximum, and it cools off some during a solar minimum. And Ulysses went around the north and south pole of the sun at both a solar minimum and a solar maximum to compare the two.
Oh, fantastic. The data that you got from that must have been unbelievable.
Very, very much so. And then my second flight, I was the pilot of Discovery again, and that was a classified DoD mission. We deployed a classified satellite that I still can't talk about. But that was a great flight. My third flight, I got to command the Space Shuttle Columbia on a science mission, International Microgravity Lab 2. And we had a laboratory in the payload bay, and the crew worked 24 hours a day. In fact, we set a record for the longest space shuttle mission. It got broken later, but we were up in space for 15 days doing science in the laboratory, and half the crew worked while half the crew was off. And we had 83 experiments from around the world, different countries supporting it. And that was the way, kind of a model for how we do science on the International Space Station today.
Yeah.
And then my last flight, I got to say it was the best. You know,
it was the most historic, I think. Yes.
So 25 years ago, last night, we launched on the Space Shuttle Endeavour to orbit with the Unity node in the payload bay, the first U.S. module of the International Space Station. And then we rendezvoused in space with the Russian FGB, functional cargo block, whose name was Zarya. And that means sunrise in Russian. That launched November 20th, 2 weeks before we launched. And it launched on a Proton rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. And let's see, on the 5th, which was today, 25 years ago today, Nancy Curry, my prime arm operator, also my flight engineer, PhD in industrial engineering.
Wow.
And was an Army helicopter pilot prior to getting her PhD and coming to work for NASA. She lifted Unity out of the payload bay, and we attached it to the orbiter docking station.
Wow.
And then 25 years ago tomorrow, we rendezvoused with the FGB, grabbed it with the arm, and attached it to the other end of Node 1. And that was the beginning of the space station. Then we did 3 spacewalks to connect all the power and data connectors. And then on December 10th of 1998, we entered the space station for the very first time. We were the first crew to get to go inside the space station, and that was absolutely amazing.
Wow.
So we activated the space station and did all these spacewalks, and we laid the groundwork for what today is just an amazing facility, the size of a football field. You know, and we've got the United States, ESA and all its partners, Canada, Japan, Russia, and we're all working together up there as one.
Yes.
That's why I'm so proud of the Unity module. And I know that the kids can't see it on your podcast, but behind me is an emblem that says Unity.
Yes.
It's the backup emblem from the International Space Station. They gave it to me when I left the Johnson Space Center.
Wow.
But if there had been a problem with the emblem on the Unity node, we would have put this backup one on. And I've always had it. I've always had it in my office and over my desk or around, because unity and all that we do is so important. Teamwork. Now, space is a team sport.
Yes.
And we have to work together as an inclusive, united team in order to be successful. And on the space station, we're working together in unity up there. In spite of all the problems down here on Earth, we still work together as one to keep the space station operating, doing the amazing science that we do up there.
Wonderful.
Wow.
We will definitely be sharing this image, so they'll be able to see that behind you, Bob. I did want to ask, when you first went into what became the space station then, do you remember having any thoughts back then of what you thought the future would be? Did you have any guesses or ideas in your brain of, hey, 25 years from now, this is going to be an enormous football field size thing with a whole bunch of nodes, etc.? Or did you think, hey, this is a great project, I hope it goes somewhere?
Jeff, absolutely. First off, here's a question for you. Who was the first person to enter the International Space Station?
Oh,
well, if you guys were the first crew, I'm guessing you.
Yeah.
It's a trick question. There was no first person, because when it came time to enter the space station, I didn't even tell the crew. The media wanted to know, but when we opened the hatch, I said, Sergey, get up here. And I grabbed my crewmate, Sergey Krikalev. And if you look at any of the pictures, Sergey and I enter all the hatches side by side. There was no first person. I said, if we're going to have
fabulous.
Nice.
If we're going to have an international space station, we need to enter as an international crew. So we went in side by side. So I was the first American and he was the first Russian, but there was no first person.
I love that. And that's fabulous. And that lives up to your whole unity mantra and everything about this. Oh, that's amazing. So when you got in there and you had to turn everything on, did everything work the way it was supposed to?
So there again, that is a great question. So we spent hours and hours testing the software at the facility, at the Sonny Carter facility in Houston.
Right.
And we kept finding issues. And then there was a series of tests that we did with the actual node and an emulator. It simulates what the FGV was and how it operates, connected to the computer. Testing the software in Florida in the Space Station Processing Facility in what was called MEIT, Mission Essential Integration Test.
Okay.
So again, making sure that all the software and everything worked right. And we found problems there that had to get corrected before we flew. Once we got on orbit, I had a IBM 760 XD laptop computer that was plugged in through a PCMMU that was able to send commands from the aft flight deck of the space shuttle to the International Space Station. So again, doing it rather than me just sending all the commands, I had Sergey Krikalev working with me, and we shared the responsibility, but together we activated the International Space Station. And I'm telling you, nobody was more surprised than me when everything worked absolutely perfect.
Oh, that's awesome.
All that testing paid off because everything worked exactly as it should. All the systems came on board working correctly, and it was absolutely amazing.
Wow, that's pretty fantastic. Amazing, considering how many different systems were, had to work, and the fact that one of the modules was not made in the U.S., so you had to do all of those different things together. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and in fact, that module had never seen the interface with the node. Design and everything, that's how perfect everything has to be. Everything came together perfectly in space for the very first time.
It was meant to be, right? It was meant to be.
It was. So Jeff asked, what was I thinking, when we entered the space station?
Yeah.
And what did I think about all the future of it and everything?
Right.
So we got to make the very first logbook entry in the International Space Station log.
Oh, okay. That's cool. That's cool.
And so I thought about it, and I'm sitting inside the space station with the logbook, and I'm entering this entry.
Yep.
And I had the whole crew, we all signed it. So I'm gonna read you the very first logbook entry for the International Space Station. December 10th, 1998. Activation of the International Space Station by the crew of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, STS-88, ISS-2A. From small beginnings, great things come. Today we ingressed for the first time the Unity and Zarya modules. May the spirit of international cooperation and space exploration continue to grow as the space station grows, taking us on to the moon, Mars, and beyond. The crew of Endeavour: Bob Cabana, Rick Sturko, Jerry Ross, Nancy Curry, Jim Newman, and Sergei Krikalev.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's wonderful.
Yes. That's an honor, being the first one to mark in the log. That's a big Navy tradition, right?
Yes. So yes, we did have an inkling that this was going to grow into something absolutely fantastic, and I think it's met or exceeded any expectation of what people could have had for it.
Absolutely.
That's terrific. So usually with a guest, after we just talked about 4 space flights, the last of which ended with what we were just talking about, starting the International Space Station, we would be done with an episode. But turns out now we're talking to Bob Cabana. And after you're done with these amazing space flights,
yes,
you apparently came back and decided you wanted to do some more amazing jobs.
Yes.
What did you do after you retired from flying as an astronaut, Bob?
So 1998, that was my my last mission. After all the post-flight stuff, I was asked to take a leadership position at NASA.
Okay.
And I was the
Understandable.
manager for international operations for the space station program. And I was approaching being an active duty Marine, and about half the astronaut office is active duty military, and NASA reimburses DoD for our pay and allowances.
Right.
Not being a general officer, I was a colonel in the Marine Corps in 06. When you have 30 years of service, you have to retire. You can't stay on active duty.
Right.
So I retired from the Marine Corps and went to work directly for NASA in the senior executive service as the manager for international operations for the space station program.
Wow.
And then that just one thing kind of led to another. I enjoyed, worked hard and did well in that job. And then they asked me to go run our operations in Moscow. So I sold my house and packed up and moved to Moscow, Russia, and lived in Moscow for a year and a half.
Wow.
Running human spaceflight operations there. And then I got asked to come back, and I was the deputy manager for the International Space Station program for a short period of time before I was asked to be the director of flight crew operations, which has the astronaut office plus all the flight operations out at Ellington Field.
Yeah.
I did that job for a few years, and then I got asked to be the deputy director of the Johnson Space Center. So I was the number 2 guy in Houston, and I did that for 3 years. And I got asked to be the director of the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi.
We're noticing a pattern here, yes.
I moved to Mississippi, and I spent a year there when I got asked to be the director of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And I spent 12 and a half years as the director of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And that was an amazing time. We safely flew out the last 12 shuttle missions. We transitioned from shuttle to the future. We transitioned the Kennedy Space Center to be this vibrant multi-user spaceport that it is today, enabling commercial operations.
Right.
I think they're going to have like 100 launches out of the Cape this year. It's amazing how well things are going. I was going to retire. I've been working for our nation since I graduated from high school, and I took that oath of office and took off to court.
Yes,
done that myself. Yes.
And I kind of figured I'd paid my dues. And I got this call from Washington from this former U.S. senator that I had worked closely with from Florida as the director of the Kennedy Space Center. And Senator Nelson said, "Bob, I want you to come to Washington and be the associate administrator." I said, "Well, sir, I was going to retire." And he said, "I know, but we need you."
There you go. Those 3 words. We need you.
I know you were going to retire, but this is better.
Your country needs you.
There you go.
I said, "All right, I'll do it for 1 year." And now it's been almost 3 years. And I can't imagine not having been up here working with Senator Nelson as the NASA administrator. And the deputy administrator is Colonel retired Pam Melroy.
Yes.
Who who I selected to be an astronaut when I was on the board that selected her when I was chief of the astronaut office.
Oh, that's great.
So be nice to the people that work for you, because you never know when you might be working for them.
There you go. That's very good. So, I mean, you've been here through the start of the commercial spaceflight and everything, and now Artemis. I mean, I know it's hard. This is probably going to be a difficult question, but can you think, what is the most exciting thing you think about NASA going forward?
Oh, this is just an amazing time for our nation's space program right now. There is so much going on. The vibrant commercial market, all that we're doing together. Yes, we're operating in low Earth orbit, but we're going to bring the space station to an end. It can't work forever. We're trying to establish a commercial economy in low Earth orbit with commercial space stations. We're going back to the moon with the Artemis program, and we're going back in a sustainable way. And, we went with Apollo in the 60s and 70s. Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo in Greek mythology.
Yes.
And I think it's so appropriate because we want to put the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. So we're going back to the moon with the Artemis program, but we're not going like Apollo for a 2 or 3 day camping trip. We're going to stay. We're going in a sustainable way. And we're going to the moon to learn what we need to know and be able to go on to Mars, to establish a presence in our solar system beyond our home planet. And we have so much to learn. And going to the moon, we're going to learn more about the moon, and learning about the moon helps us learn how the Earth was established. There's so much to know there, but we want to use the resources on the moon. We're going to the south pole of the moon this time.
Right.
And the reason we're going there is we believe there are tons of water ice in the craters and the shadows. And water is what? It's hydrogen and oxygen. It's fuel and air to breathe.
Exactly.
So we don't have to take it all with us. We can utilize the resources of the moon. And we want to do the same thing when we go to Mars. We believe there's water on Mars. Mars has an atmosphere of methane. Methane can be used as a fuel. So we have a lot to learn in how we operate away from our home planet safely and successfully. We still are learning about how the human system behaves in a microgravity environment.
Yes.
We continue to learn in spite of all our time on the International Space Station.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a whole hour talk in itself.
That is, yes.
Human body in space. We have a skeletal structure here on Earth to support our muscle mass. In space, your brain says, I don't need this skeleton anymore. And you start shedding calcium. It's just like osteoporosis, a bone problem for men and women, mostly women here on Earth, where your bones get weak and break easily. Well, what we found is drugs aren't the best way to counter that. What really counters that is exercise. And the astronauts on the International Space Station have mandatory exercise 2.5 hours a day. There's strength training with a resistive exercise device. There's running on a treadmill where you wear this bungee cord system to hold you down. So you get that impact to your bones. Your bones need that impact. And there's a cycle ergometer for aerobic exercise. So that's important. We found there's a problem with swelling, an edema, a swelling of the optic nerve that impacts vision. And it might be a swelling of the brain. We need to look at that and understand that better. Radiation is going to be a huge problem when we leave low Earth orbit, and we don't have the Earth's magnetosphere to protect us from the radiation anymore. How do we protect crews on the moon and on a 1.5 year mission to Mars, where it's 6 to 8 months to get there and another 6 to 8 months on Mars for the planets to align for a 6 to 8 month trip home? We need better propulsion. There's so much that we need to learn, but what I want to say is it is just a truly exciting time.
It is.
And people see the astronauts, but we are just such a small part of our nation's space program. Like I said, most of what astronauts do is support other people flying. And for me, having been part of this amazing team for the last 38 years, that's what makes it special. The great people I get to work with.
Yes.
And we need everybody. We need an inclusive team, not just scientists and engineers. We have lawyers, communications folks, procurement folks. You name it. Anybody, any occupation can be part of the NASA team. And for 11 years in a row, we have been the best agency to work for in the federal government. And why is that?
That's fantastic.
I know. And I believe it's because of the amazing mission we have, but it's also the way we treat our people in the environment that we create and how we work together. So, gosh, I could go on and on talking to kids, but I want to leave them with one message, okay? And I go back to always do your best at whatever you do, okay? I hope that you find find where your passion is, that you're doing something that you really enjoy. I have hardly worked a day in my life because I loved flying jets. I loved
Nice.
That's awesome.
right?
Nice.
I loved being a test pilot, and I love being an astronaut and working at NASA. So if you do something that you're passionate about, two things happen. First off, when you study in school, you study because you enjoy it. So it's easy to get good grades.
Yes.
'Cause
Yes.
you love what you're
Yes.
doing. And at work, you do really well at your job because you love what you're doing.
Yes.
And so find where your talent is and where your passion is. And then don't give up. I flunked my eye test when I got to Pensacola after
Oh,
graduated from the Naval Academy. And I spent 3 years, I earned my wings as a Navy flight officer, naval flight officer. And I
okay.
spent 3 years as an A6 bombardier navigator before, and I always passed my eye test 2020 before I convinced them to let me go back to flight training and earn my wings as a pilot. I didn't get into test pilot school on the first try because they didn't need any A6 pilots, but I didn't give up. I got picked up 6 months
Right.
later. And then I love being a test pilot. It just was everything that I ever wanted to do. But
Wow.
That's great.
when they were taking applications for the astronaut program, I said, I can do this. And I applied and I didn't get selected. And I was so disappointed because I realized this is what I really, really want to do.
Yes.
And they said, we're sorry, Bob, you didn't make it, but we're going to take some more next year and we'd like you to try again. So I went through that whole process again and was fortunate enough to get selected. So the moral there is do what you enjoy doing.
Right.
Had I not got selected to be a pilot, or a test pilot, I love being a pilot. Had I not gotten selected to be an astronaut, I love being a test pilot, right? So, and I was still contributing. I'm still doing something worthwhile.
Right.
But don't give up. Set a goal for yourself. And when you don't get on the first try again. But
Yes.
again,
Yes. Love that.
Do what you're passionate about, what you have a talent for, and it makes life a whole lot easier.
That's true.
That's terrific.
Definitely.
Hey, so I appreciate that so much, especially coming from you, having just talked really quickly about all that you've done. I would be remiss as a super space geek, as galactic space geek, Jeff, to not ask the one question I've been dying to ask before we finish up. Having reached your current position of Associate Administrator of NASA, being so high up in such a great organization and having done so many things along the way, you thought you were going to be there for 1 year. You've spent 3 years. What has it been like overseeing NASA sort of as a whole? Because we've spent so much time talking about astronauts and just the human spaceflight program. NASA is so much more than that we don't have time to talk about in this one episode. What's it like being right at the top of that pyramid, being able to see and touch all of those different areas?
I am so glad you asked, Jeff, because it is so amazing. I was really focused on human spaceflight, being at the Kennedy Space Center until I got up here at headquarters. But I was a test pilot before I was an astronaut. And NASA has an amazing aeronautical portfolio.
Yes.
The X-59, the Quest, the quiet supersonic jet to learn how we can build an aircraft that makes low booms where you're not breaking windows so we can have supersonic transportation.
Yes.
Sustainable aviation, green aviation. We're trying to be net carbon zero by 2050, that we're not polluting.
Wow.
We're making jets more efficient, transportation better. We're integrating. I can just go on and on. The science missions that we do, they are so cool. What we continue to learn, how we protect our home planet. NASA, the data that we get from all the probes that we have, all the orbiting satellites learning about our Earth system and our changing climate and understanding it better so that we can do something about it. That's NASA. It's just, there's so many amazing areas. You're just going to have to ask me to come back and talk some more.
That would be fabulous.
Okay.
Yes.
We will.
We've actually had Niels Larson, who is the pilot of the X-59. We've interviewed him on the show too. Yeah, he is
wonderful.
A great guy.
He is fantastic.
Also a fellow in the Society of Experimental Test Pilots.
There you go. There you go. Exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, we will definitely have to have you come back. But now we're at the point in the show where we ask our guests to give our listeners a challenge. I'm very curious to hear what your challenge is for our listeners, Bob.
Okay, so I think this is an amazing challenge. You asked me about when I was young, what I thought about being an astronaut.
Yes.
And I think it's really important that people can see themselves in different jobs that they want to do. So I would like everyone to take a look at the current astronaut corps. All right. Men, women, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, it encompasses everybody. And I would like the students to research the astronaut corps and then find somebody that they are most like, that they can relate to, and see that it might be somebody that went to the same school they did, somebody that grew up in their hometown, their state. It might be somebody that looks like them, might be somebody that has the same interests as them. And astronauts have very different interests and very different backgrounds and different degrees. I'd like your students to find someone that they can relate to in the astronaut corps to see that, hey, maybe I could do that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I love that. Well, and it's just like when I met you when I was at NASA Kennedy and you said you were a Naval Academy grad. And I was like, oh, go Navy, right? We are both. So you make a connection there. Exactly, right? That's fantastic. Well, this has been such an amazing conversation. We are honored to have you join us, Bob. Thank you so much for being on Solve It for Kids.
Bob, thank you very much.
Jennifer, Jeff, thank you so much for all that you do. I think it's an amazing podcast, and I wish all your students the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What a fascinating conversation.
Yes.
And that is a gentleman that we could literally talk to probably forever, because we could take deep dives on every single one of the stops along his way as a career to learn more about building the space station and the fact that he was there when it got connected, and for him to share the story of how there was not a first person to board the International Space Station. What an amazing story to share. And what about everything Bob told us, Jen?
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was really wonderful talking to him about his career, how it got started, what he did as an astronaut, which is amazing, and then everything that he went on to do with the rest of his career. And I love how he ended with NASA's goals for how we're looking out into space, and also everything that NASA's doing for this planet that we're on, our blue marble here. This was a really intriguing conversation that kind of covered everything you can think of about NASA.
Yes, and with the fact that Bob pretty much worked in every place that most galactic space geeks know about that touch with NASA, this was fascinating. And his challenge, how thoughtful a challenge is this for having everyone out there that likes space and listens to this episode in our podcast to go look at the current NASA astronaut corps and find someone that is not just looks like you, but find someone that is similar to you in some way. Whether it's the same hometown or home state, same interests, has the same degree that you either have or are working on. There's so many different ways that we are similar. And the fact that Bob had the career that he just told us about, and he started as a kid not having any idea that he would be able to have all of those opportunities. What an incredible lesson to think about.
It is. It absolutely is. So if any of you do this and you find an astronaut that you think is really cool, and you learn more about them, we would like to know about it. So you can always connect with us on social media. We are at KidsSolve at Facebook, X, and Instagram. And our very own website, solveitforkids.com, we will have a page for this episode like we do for all of them. You'll be able to learn more about Bob Cabana, about NASA, and all the different things that he has done. And finally, we would like, Bob is retiring at the end of 2023, and we would like to thank him for his service that he has done for our country for all of these years, and wish him well and hope he remembers to come back on our show one day.
Especially since it was his idea to come back on the show. Jennifer and I will both be looking through the current NASA astronauts to find who most resembles us in their current core. We definitely hope you do the same thing. Until next time, you will hear Jen and Jeff on
Solve It for Kids!